Hi everyone, I'm Jiaqiang. The topic of my study is exploring the effects of textual and non-textual narrative on player experience in first-person horror video games. So, why do this research? Although their previous works investigate these two narratives and point out non-textual narrative can provide a better player experience than textual narrative, most are the case study or analysis of ground theories that stand on perspective of designers. Few are the experimental study that validate this phenomenon. The goal of this study are designing an experiment to understand how these two narratives affect the player experience and provide recommendations for the narrative design. The textual narrative conveying the story through script. Textual debriefing, it is a traditional narrative medium. The non-textual narrative refer to the environmental storytelling, which let players realize or experience the game story through game environment, such as the game object. The measuring of player experience in game narrative considers 6 aspects: curiosity, concentration, comprehension, control, challenging, and empathy. This study selected 2 published first-person horror video games that can be categorized into textual narrative and non-textual narrative. Lucy's chapter of Visage is mainly used non-textual narrative. The demo part of The Beast Inside mainly use textual narrative. I recruited 19 participants through convenient sampling, and these 19 participants will be counterbalancing to play both Visage and The Beast Inside. There are 2 surveys, one for the Visage and the other for the Beast Inside. The survey contains questions for collecting demographic data, 7-point question to collect quantitative data, and open questions to collect qualitative data. I do the factual analysis and multivariate ANOVA. The main results show that for factual 1, the comprehension about the Beast Inside is significantly higher than the Visage, which means the textual narrative help players easily and clearly understand the storyline. For the 8-20, the continuous influence about the Visage is significantly higher than the Beast Inside. Non-textual narrative hold the advantages of motivating players to do a closer exploration for the game story, generating unsettled atmosphere, providing a deep impression about the game story, but have disadvantages that players feel confused, lose goals, feel extremely horrible, and feel no details. The textual narratives have the advantages of telling clear and detailed story, and players can take a break and relieve themselves from the extremely nervous and horrible game, but have the disadvantages of feel annoying when remember to record detailed content, and players do not prefer to read a long and complex sentence. So the result partially supports comparing to textual narrative. The non-textual narrative improves players' experience in game narrative, but also partially rejected it. Design recommendations include first, use textual hint to convey complex storyline. Second, after a long nervous gameplay, using textual debriefing help players relieve themselves from the game world. Third, avoiding long and complex word and sentence. Fourth, do not let players remember or record details in the textual debriefing. Fifth, combining the textual and non-textual narratives and taking their unique advantages. Sixth, non-textual narrative is a good way to convey simple and certain events, like the generation of signs of threat. So this study designed an experiment to understand how these 2 narratives affect player experience. And also, there are some limitations. For example, some confounding variables may affect the result. Future work could try to focus on to do a lab control experiment to push the result into a more general situation. Thanks for listening.